Welcome to Crisis in Perception, where we examine the systems shaping our world, one book at a time.
It is good to be back.
It's great to have you. And today we are wading into what might just be the most contentious territory we have ever covered. I mean, truly.
That's saying something.
It is. We are looking at a system that runs in the background of every single decision you make, every law that gets passed, and, every judgment you make about your neighbors or about people halfway across the world. We are talking about morality.
Right. But not morality in the sense of a list of rules like be nice or don't steal. We're talking about something deeper, the structural validity of moral truth itself.
Exactly. That's the perfect way to put it. We are diving deep into The Moral Landscape, How Science Can Determine Human Values by Sam Harris. And the central inquiry here, the systemic question, it's massive.
Yeah.
It challenges the fundamental architecture of how modern society thinks about right and wrong.
The question is really, is morality just a matter of opinion? Is it a cultural preference, like liking vanilla ice cream over chocolate?
Or is it a system? A system of cause and effect governed by laws that are just as real as the laws of physics or biology.
And that question, it just creates this collision between two worlds that usually stay very, very far apart. It brings us face to face with what philosophers call the ASOT problem.
Okay, let's break that down because it's so central to everything we're going to talk about.
It is. It's a traditional systemic failure, or at least it's seen as a barrier in how we view the world. We've built this wall in our thinking. On one side of the wall, you have facts.
Science, reality, data, the physical universe, the is.
The is, what is the case? And on the other side of the wall, you have values, meaning morality, ethics, how we ought to live.
The ought.
The ought. And for centuries, really, the consensus among philosophers and scientists has been that you cannot get an ought from an is.
Meaning, just because something is a certain way in nature, like, say, lions eat gazelles, that doesn't mean it ought to be that way for humans.
Exactly. Science can tell you in meticulous detail how to build a nuclear bomb, the physics of it, the engineering. That's the is. But it supposedly can't tell you whether you should drop it. That's the ought.
That's the moral question.
Precisely. That is the standard view. Science deals with the descriptive. Morality deals with the prescriptive. But the whole argument of this book, the reason we're doing this deep dive, is that Harris is arguing that this wall, it's an illusion.
It's not real.
It's a cognitive error, a flaw in our collective operating system. And the stakes for this couldn't be higher. This is not just, philosophical hair splitting for academics in tweed jackets.
Correct. This has consequences.
Massive consequences. How we answer this question affects how societies treat women, how we punish our children, how we address global suffering, and frankly, how we think about the long-term survival of our species.
If we get this wrong, if we just accept that science has nothing to say about human values, we end up in this really strange and paralyzing position. We end up in a world where we feel we can't judge a culture that, say, throws acid in the faces of young girls who just want to go to school.
Because the answer is, well, that's just their culture. Who are we to judge?
Exactly. It's their value.
Right. And that leads to this intellectual and moral paralysis. But if we can start to view morality as a system with inputs and outputs, then we can start to objectively measure things. We can measure failure, which in this system is suffering.
And we can measure success.
Yes.
Which is flourishing.
Exactly. And once you can do that, you can dismantle that paralyzing idea that we can't judge harmful practices just because they have a long tradition behind them.
So let's set our focus for this deep dive. We are looking at patterns and structures. We are not here to give you a new list of 10 commandments or tell you how to vote. That is not the point.
No. We're looking at what Harris calls the moral landscape, which is a kind of topological map of human experience.
Right.
We want to understand the system mechanics of well-being.
We're looking at the operating system itself, not just the specific apps that happen to be running on it.
That's the perfect analogy.
Okay, so let's start with the architect of this system, or at least the person mapping it for us, Sam Harris. Now, a lot of people probably know him as a public intellectual, a podcaster, maybe from his meditation app.
Right. He's a well-known figure.
He is, but we need to set that aside. We aren't looking at him as a celebrity figure here. We need to look at his specific background as it relates directly to this argument.
Absolutely. To understand the book's argument, you have to understand where the author's standing, what tools he's using. And Harris has this really unique dual background. First, he holds a degree in philosophy from Stanford.
So he knows the history, he knows the logic games, the ethics, the centuries of debate around this ASOT problem.
He knows the philosophical landscape. But then, And this is the critical part. He also holds a PhD in neuroscience from UCLA.
And that specific combination, philosophy plus neuroscience, is the engine of this entire book, isn't
And
it?
it is everything. He's building a bridge between two disciplines that almost never talk to each other. He's connecting abstract ethics, the philosophy side, with the physical, messy reality of the human brain, the neuroscience side.
Because he isn't treating morality as some kind of ghost in the machine.
Not at all. He's treating it as a state of the machine itself. Your well-being, your suffering, your sense of purpose, these aren't mystical concepts. They are physical processes happening in your brain.
And that's a radical departure, because usually those two camps are in completely separate buildings. You have philosophers arguing about definitions in a room with no windows, and then you have neuroscientists scanning brains, but being very, very careful not to make any grand claims about meaning or values.
They shy away from it. Harris is saying you cannot possibly understand one without the other. They are two sides of the same coin.
And he's writing this book against the backdrop of what he describes as a serious cultural rupture, a kind of crisis in modern thinking.
It's like a battlefield with two deeply entrenched sides, and they're both, in his view, getting it wrong. On one side of the battlefield, you have the religious right.
Okay, so let's map their system. It's a pretty clear and simple system, actually. Moral truth exists. It's absolute. It's unchanging.
Right. But where does it come from? It comes from, as he puts it, a voice in a whirlwind. It comes from Scripture, from divine revelation, from God. The input is a sacred text.
And the output is an absolute moral rule. Don't do X, always do Y. And it's not based on evidence. It's based on authority.
Exactly. And for that reason, they tend to mistrust science, because science keeps chipping away at the factual claims their texts make, which undermines their authority. So that's one camp.
Okay, what's the other camp?
The other camp is, in some ways, more interesting and more problematic. It's the secular left and, by and large, the scientific community itself. And this is where the system gets really buggy.
These are the people who claim to value reason, logic, evidence.
The rationalists. But when the topic turns to morality, they have completely conceded the ground. They have embraced what's known as moral relativism.
And that's the idea we touched on earlier, that no culture's values are fundamentally superior to another's, that we can't say the Taliban is wrong, we can only say they are different.
Yes, that saying slavery is wrong is not a statement of fact. It's just an expression of your personal or cultural preference. It's like saying, I don't like broccoli.
So the crisis is this. You have a situation where the only people loudly claiming that moral truth is real are the people who are completely detached from evidence and reason.
The religious fundamentalists.
And meanwhile, the rational people, the people who are supposed to be champions of evidence, refuse to make moral judgments at all because they think science is powerless in that domain.
It creates this enormous vacuum.
A dangerous vacuum.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Because when the reasonable people go silent on the most important questions of human existence, the unreasonable people get to define the moral landscape for everyone.
So, into that vacuum, Harris steps in with his central thesis, which acts as a kind of system output. He argues very simply that moral reasoning is a system that is constrained by facts.
It's a logic chain.
Yeah.
And it's worth walking through this slowly, because if you accept the premises of this chain, the rest of the book logically follows.
Okay, let's do it. Proposition 1.
Proposition 1. Morality relates to the well-being of conscious creatures. If an action or a rule has no effect, positive or negative, on the experience of a conscious being, it's not a moral issue.
We're going to dive deep into that consciousness part in a minute because it's the foundation of everything.
It is. So that's one. Proposition 2. Well-being itself depends on states of the brain and events in the world. Your happiness, your suffering, your sense of purpose. These are physical processes in your brain, influenced by your genetics, your environment, your relationships. You literally cannot have a feeling without a corresponding brain state.
That's the neuroscience part. It's not magic, it's biology.
It's biology. And if you accept those two premises, then the conclusion, Proposition 3, becomes almost inescapable. Therefore, there are scientific truths, facts, to be known about what promotes well-being. There are facts to be known about morality.
He uses this powerful analogy to get us over the I sought wall, the health analogy.
This is the tool he uses to really smash that wall down. Think about medicine and the concept of health. Do we have a perfect, final, universally agreed upon definition of health?
No, of course not. The definition of health in 1850 is wildly different from what it is today. It changes with new knowledge. It's fluid.
It's fluid, it has fuzzy boundaries, but, and this is the key, does that mean health is purely subjective? Is it just a matter of opinion?
No, absolutely not.
Exactly. That is the critical point. Just because the boundaries are fuzzy doesn't mean the center doesn't exist. If you have cholera or if you have a compound fracture with the bone sticking out of your leg, you can't just say, well, in my culture, this is just a different but equally valid lifestyle choice.
Right. You can't say, who are you to judge my broken leg? Stop being so intolerant of my gangrene.
You can't. A broken leg is a broken leg. It is an objective failure of the system of the body. It restricts movement. It causes immense pain. It prevents flourishing. Harris's argument is that morality is simply the science of psychological and social health.
So just because we don't have all the answers yet, just because we can't stick a moral thermometer into a society and get a precise reading, that doesn't mean the answers don't exist in principle.
Precisely. We're in the very early days of this science, just like we were in the early days of medicine centuries ago. But that doesn't invalidate the entire project.
I love that. It just takes all the mysticism out of it. It stops being about good and evil with capital letters and starts being about flourishing versus suffering. It turns morality into a branch of biology, essentially.
Or maybe a complex sociology that's deeply rooted in biology, yeah. He's saying that there are right and wrong answers to the question, how should we organize our societies? Just as there are right and wrong answers to the question, how should we treat a viral infection?
Okay, let's dive into the core systems analysis of this then. You mentioned consciousness. Harris establishes a baseline rule for this entire system, and it's this. Consciousness is the only intelligible domain of value.
This is so crucial because it filters out an enormous amount of noise from traditional moral philosophy. He uses this thought experiment that I found incredibly clarifying.
Let's hear
He
it.
says, imagine you put a value in a box, a moral value, let's say purity or honor, but this value has absolutely no relationship now or ever to the experience of any conscious being. Not a human, not a dog, not an alien on another planet, not a mouse. It doesn't cause happiness. It doesn't prevent pain. It doesn't create beauty. It doesn't alter perception in any way. It's just there.
Like a rule that says you must hop on one foot every Tuesday on the dark side of the moon, even if no one is there to do it or see it or even know about the rule.
Exactly. What is the status of that value? Harris calls it the least interesting thing in the universe. It's definitionally worthless. If a value doesn't, at some point, translate into a change in the experience of a conscious creature, it is, by definition, irrelevant.
So if rocks could feel pain, then geology would become a branch of ethics.
That's it. But they don't, as far as we know, so we don't worry about the subjective experience of granite.
So the system rule is all value, all morality, must eventually map onto the felt experience of a conscious brain.
Which brings us to the central metaphor of the entire book, the visual model we really need to hold in our heads for the rest of this conversation, the moral landscape.
Okay, let's try to visualize this together. Imagine a vast, three-dimensional landscape, like a mountain range.
This landscape represents the space of all real and all potential experiences for conscious beings. The peaks on this landscape, the high points, correspond to the heights of potential well-being.
So flourishing, joy, creativity, deep love, safety, fulfillment, the best possible moments of existence.
All of that, the highest points of human and potentially non-human experience. And then, of course, you have the valleys.
And the valleys are the opposite.
The valleys represent the deepest possible suffering, abject misery, torture, psychosis, despair, the physical agony of starvation or disease, the worst possible experiences a conscious mind can endure.
Okay, so we have this map of peaks and valleys. How do we move around on it? What are the system dynamics?
This is the key. Different behaviors, different laws, different cultural codes, different economic systems, these all act as coordinates on the map. They are the things that move a population across this landscape.
So if you adopt a certain set of beliefs and practices, say you value scientific inquiry, you have a fair judicial system, you have access to modern medicine, you might be moving your society up toward a peak.
You're climbing. But if you adopt a different set of beliefs, say a totalitarian dictatorship where everyone is spying on everyone else and free speech is punished by death, you are actively moving your society down into a valley of suffering.
And here's where it gets really nuanced and interesting. He's very clear that there isn't just one single peak on this landscape.
This is such a crucial point. This is how Harris counters the inevitable charge that he's a kind of moral dictator or a fascist trying to impose one way of life on everyone. He explicitly acknowledges there isn't just one right way to live.
Just like there isn't one right way to be healthy.
The health analogy again, exactly. You can be a healthy vegan.
Yeah.
You can be a healthy omnivore who does CrossFit. You can have a flourishing society that is highly individualistic and capitalistic. And you could, in principle, have a flourishing society that is deeply communal and socialist.
You could have a peak where everyone is a meditating Zen monk, and another peak where everyone is a hyper-creative, party-loving artist in a bustling city. Both could represent high states of well-being.
Exactly. There are many peaks. But, and this is the giant but that changes everything, there are many, many wrong ways to live. Just as there are many wrong ways to eat. If you only eat sand and battery acid, you will die. That is not a valid alternative diet.
That's not a peak. That's not even a foothill. That's a deep valley.
It's a valley. There are many peaks, but there are far more valleys. And the simple fact that there are multiple peaks doesn't mean that anything goes. It doesn't mean that every location on the landscape is equally good. The metaphor simultaneously destroys moral relativism while preserving moral pluralism.
It's a really elegant solution to that problem. So the question then becomes, if this model makes so much sense, why do we have such a hard time admitting it? Why is the current system, especially in academia and the intellectual world, so committed to failing to judge these valleys?
Harris points to a couple of things here. Incentive structures and what he calls the relativism trap. Part of it is what you could call the consensus fallacy.
The idea that if a whole culture agrees on something, it must have some kind of validity or truth to it.
Right. We tend to think that. But the book argues pretty forcefully that truth has absolutely nothing to do with consensus.
He uses the example of witchcraft, I remember.
Yes, it's a perfect example. You can have an entire society, 100% consensus, that believes the old woman who lives next door caused my crops to fail because she is a witch and she cursed my field. They can all agree.
And they are all wrong.
They are all factually, demonstrably wrong about how the universe works. Causality doesn't work that way.
And that factual error about reality directly leads to a moral error, dragging the woman out of her home and burning her alive.
Exactly. The suffering is a direct consequence of a factual misunderstanding. But then you have this scientific silence loop. An anthropologist or a sociologist might go and study that culture, and they will describe how these people behave. They might even offer an explanation like, oh, the ritual burning the witch relieves social tension and reinforces community bonds.
That's purely descriptive. That's Project One, which we'll get to.
It's pure Project One. But they will refuse to take the next step and say, and this is a terrible, horrifying, and wrong way to live, based on a delusion. This refusal creates an incentive structure where even the most harmful cultural practices get protected under the banner of diversity or respect.
It really seems like we are just terrified of being called intolerant or colonialist.
We are. And that fear, while maybe well-intentioned in some contexts, has completely paralyzed our ability to distinguish between what is merely different and what is objectively harmful and wrong.
Let's make this concrete with the case studies. Because Harris doesn't just keep this abstract, he brings in these real-world examples that really test your stomach for relativism. The first one is the Dobu Islanders.
The Dobu are a fascinating and frankly terrifying example of a systemic failure. This society, which was documented off the coast of Papua New Guinea, was essentially designed around the principle of maximum paranoia.
Okay, so what was the system design? What were the core beliefs?
The core belief, the central operating principle, was that intimacy increases the power of sorcery.
Wait, say that again?
The closer you are to someone, the more power their magic has over you. Now just stop and think about the incentives that creates.
Oh my God. If sorcery is most powerful when you're close to someone, then the person you have to fear the most is your own spouse.
Your spouse, your children, your parents, the people you share a meal with, the people you sleep next to. They're the ones most likely to be plotting to kill you with magic.
That sounds like a recipe for a collective, society-wide nervous breakdown.
It's even worse. They viewed agriculture as a zero-sum game. They believed that yams, their primary crop, had a kind of magical agency. They believed yams were wanderers.
You mean like they could get up and walk around?
Effectively, yes. They believed yams moved around underground at night. So if you had a bountiful harvest, it wasn't because you were a good farmer, it was because you used powerful magic to seduce your neighbor's yams into leaving their garden and coming to yours.
Wow. So a good harvest was seen as a public confession of theft.
A confession of theft. So your two options are succeed and be seen as a dangerous criminal sorcerer, or fail and starve to death. What is the outcome of a system built on these beliefs?
I can't even imagine just Incandescent mistrust, constant misery, a complete and total lack of love or relaxation or safety. It's a deep, dark, miserable valley on the moral landscape.
It's one of the deepest valleys imaginable. And yet, under the relativistic system that dominates our thinking, we're supposed to look at the Dobu and say, well, it's just a different cultural expression. It's so rich in tradition and unique beliefs.
And Harris says, no, that's an abdication of reason. Under the landscape system, this is an objective valley. It is a demonstrable failure of human flourishing, and it's based on incorrect assumptions about reality, specifically the reality of sorcery and yem migration.
They are wrong about physics, therefore they are wrong about ethics. The two are directly linked.
If you could somehow fly a plane over the Dobu Islands and drop pamphlets that scientifically proved, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that sorcery isn't real, and if they believed those pamphlets,
Their entire moral structure would collapse overnight, and their well-being would skyrocket. Their suffering is a direct result of a lack of knowledge. It's a cognitive problem, not a values problem.
that's such a powerful reframing. It links education and knowledge directly to morality. Okay, let's look at the second case study he uses, the Albanian Qanun.
This is the traditional vendetta system found in parts of Albania. It's a complex set of ancient, customary laws, and one of its core tenets relates to blood feuds. If a man from one family commits a murder, the victim's family then has the right to kill any one of the murderer's male relatives to balance the scales of justice.
Wait, not just the murderer himself?
No, that's the key. Any of his male relatives,
I see.
his brother, his cousin, his son, even if he's just a boy. It's a system of collective punishment passed down through generations.
So what's the outcome of a system like that?
The outcome is that thousands of boys and men live as prisoners in their own homes. They're called shut-ins. They can't go to school. They can't go to the doctor. They can't work in the fields or get a job. They just sit in the dark, sometimes for decades, waiting to be shot for crime they didn't commit, perpetrated by a relative they might not have even known.
This systemically destroys the economy. It destroys public health, it destroys education, it destroys mental health. It's a multi-generational trap.
Absolutely. And yet again, a cultural anthropologist might study this and say, look at this fascinating and cohesive system of honor. Look at how it regulates justice in the absence of a strong state, Harris argues. This is not a valid cultural alternative. It is a structural design that reliably, predictably, and inevitably produces misery. It is a failed hypothesis about how to live.
It's a bad operating system. It's like trying to run a modern supercomputer on MS-DOS. It just crashes the machine over and over again.
That is the perfect way to put it. And pointing out that it crashes the machine isn't being intolerant, it's just being observant. It's a diagnostic claim, not a value judgment.
Okay, so if we want to upgrade the operating system, if we want to even think about that, we need to map the current system explicitly. Harris breaks this down into 3 distinct projects regarding morality. For me, this was a huge aha moment in the book because it explains why everyone is always talking past each other on this topic.
Yes, the 3 projects distinction is absolutely vital. If you take nothing else away from this deep dive, this framework is it. Project 1 is the descriptive project.
This is about explaining why people do what they do.
Exactly. This is the domain of evolutionary psychology, biology, anthropology, history. It answered the question, why do humans get jealous? Or why do we tend to form tribal in-groups and out-groups? Or what were the historical and economic conditions that led to the Holocaust? It just describes the hardware we've inherited and the historical context.
It's about looking at the history of the hardware. It's non-judgmental. It simply says, here is what happened, here are the likely causes.
Right. But then there is Project 2. This is the normative project. This is the core focus of the moral landscape. This project asks, given our hardware, what patterns of thought and behavior should we follow to maximize well-being and minimize suffering?
So it's not asking what we do, but what we ought to do to flourish, to find the peaks on the landscape.
Precisely. It asks, does this particular behavior actually make life better or worse in the long run? And then finally you have Project 3, which is the persuasive project.
How do we actually convince people to change?
Yes. How do we get the Dobu to stop believing in sorcery?
Hmm.
How do we convince the Albanian families to abandon the blood feud? How do we persuade people to adopt behaviors that lead up the peaks on the landscape?
And the map error, as Harris pointed out, is that most scientists and skeptics get completely stuck in Project 1.
They get stuck there, and they think the journey ends. They look at something like the Albanian blood feud, and they'll explain why humans are prone to revenge and violence, evolution, resource scarcity, status seeking, and then they stop. They assume that because they have explained the behavior, that somehow validates it or makes it impossible to judge.
It's almost like the naturalistic fallacy in reverse. the idea that because something is natural, as described by Project 1, it must therefore be accepted and we can't do Project 2.
Harris says that's a catastrophic error. He says, no, rape is natural. War is natural. Dying of a tooth infection at age 30 is natural. Evolution built us to be xenophobic, tribal, and violent. The entire project of civilization, Project 2, is often about consciously fighting against our natural default impulses in order to reach a higher peak on the moral landscape.
So civilization is basically a conspiracy we've launched against our own biology.
In many important ways, yes. It is a systematic attempt to override the default settings of the brain to achieve a better, more flourishing outcome.
Okay, let's look at the actors and the tools within this system. The primary actor, the stage on which all of this plays out, is the brain.
The brain is the nexus of all influence. This is where Harris's neuroscience background really comes to the forefront. He emphasizes that cultural norms, laws, and beliefs aren't just ideas floating in the ether. They physically alter the structure and function of the human brain.
So if you grow up in a culture of constant fear, like the dobu, your amygdala, your brain's fear center, is going to be wired and will respond differently than someone who grew up in a safe, trusting society.
Yes, culture is a mechanism for social and emotional development. But just like any complex piece of software code, it can contain bugs. It can contain viruses that cause the system to malfunction.
And in his analysis, religion is often the tool that introduces some of the biggest, most persistent bugs.
In Harris's view, yes, he argues that one of the primary ways religion can be harmful is that it often acts as a tool that decouples morality from the reality of suffering. It breaks the feedback loop.
He gives that really stark example of corporal punishment in schools in the United States.
It's a vivid example of a software bug at work. There are still states in the U.S. today where it's perfectly legal for a school official to beat a child with a wooden paddle. Why? The rationale given is almost always explicitly religious. It comes from the book of Proverbs. Spare the rod and spoil the child.
So the mechanism is this: the belief that the creator of the universe commanded this action. It overrides the observable, real-world facts.
And the observable fact, the data, the Project 2 reality is overwhelming.
Yeah.
Hitting children leads to more violence, more social pathology, more aggression, and worse academic outcomes. We know this. The data is crystal clear. But the religious bug decouples the action, hitting the child, from the result, suffering and dysfunction, because the value is supposedly coming from that voice in the whirlwind, not from the actual landscape of well-being.
It's a total feedback loop failure. You can't fix or improve the system because the system isn't designed to look at the output. It's only designed to look at the instruction manual from 2,000 years ago.
Exactly. And it's not just religious beliefs. There are biological feedback loops that are just as buggy. Harris talks at length about the identifiable victim effect.
Oh, this one gets me every time. This is that glitch in our psychology where we care profoundly more about one little girl who falls down a well than we do about a statistic that says 1 million children died of malaria.
It's a fundamental flaw in our onboard emotional hardware. Our brains evolved in small tribes, and our empathy is tuned to respond to a single suffering face. But as the numbers go up, our empathy paradoxically goes down. We are numb to statistics. We feel less for a large tragedy than a small one.
So if our morality is based on our untutored intuitions, then our intuitions absolutely suck at math.
They do. So the system correction, the primary role of civilization, you could argue, is to build institutions like laws, tax systems, and foreign aid programs that correct for this biological failure of intuition. We have to build a rational system that understands that 2 deaths are objectively worse than 1, even if our gut feeling doesn't register it that way.
That is such a powerful idea, that civilization is a series of patches we've written for our own biological glitches. We build a legal system because our raw revenge impulse is too strong and leads to valleys. We build a tax system because our raw charity impulse is too weak and inconsistent.
Yes. And then there's one more loop, the bad physics loop. He makes the analogy that just as we have intuitive physics, the kind of physics you see in a cartoon where a character runs off a cliff but doesn't fall until he looks down.
Roadrunner physics.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We all have this intuitive physics, and it's often wrong. The real world doesn't work that way. In the same way, we have an intuitive morality, and it is also often wrong. And when we treat moral opinions, like the Taliban's view that women should not be educated, as if they're unassailable values rather than what they are, which is failed hypotheses about how to maximize well-being, we sustain the suffering. We're essentially respecting bad physics.
This leads us directly into the present-day implications of this whole model. Harris is particularly critical of what he calls the paralysis of the educated class.
He is very critical here, yes. He talks about this paradox where the most educated, liberal, and well-meaning people, the ones who explicitly claim they want to make the world a better place, often end up being the staunchest defenders of the world's worst practices.
He mentions an anecdote about a celebrated scholar who, moments after giving a speech about wanting to improve the world, was defending the contextual legitimacy of things like the burqa or even female genital mutilation.
Right. And the implication is that this refusal to rank values, this commitment to relativism, creates a system where the most powerful and enlightened societies spend an inordinate amount of time and energy debating things like gay marriage, which, on the moral landscape, is either a neutral or a positive move toward a peak.
It harms absolutely no one and demonstrably increases happiness for a segment of the population.
Exactly. So we spend our time on that, while completely ignoring the deepest valleys of human suffering, like genocide, the threat of nuclear proliferation, or the total subjugation of women in other cultures. It's like we're meticulously redecorating the penthouse apartment while the building's foundation is crumbling into dust.
It creates this bizarre paradox where the most liberal people end up defending the most profoundly illiberal practices, all in the name of multiculturalism and tolerance.
And it comes down to what he calls the cost of respecting bad ideas. The text argues this so clearly. We do not respect Christian physics. If a Christian physicist stood up and said, "I'm sure this bridge will hold the weight of the traffic because Jesus is holding it up with his love," we would fire him on the spot. We don't respect Muslim algebra.
Math is math. Physics is physics. If the bridge collapses, regardless of your beliefs.
But for some reason, we continue to treat Christian morality or Muslim morality as if they are valid, separate silos of knowledge, as if they are describing different realities.
And the direct consequence of that is that it prevents the emergence of a truly universal, evidence-based standard for human rights.
You can't have universal human rights if you don't agree on universal human needs and a universal capacity for suffering. If one side can just say, well, in our culture, women don't need rights, and maybe they even like being treated as property, then the entire project of universal rights is dead on arrival.
Harris brings neuroscience back in here as a kind of future adjudicator. He uses this Don Juan at the gym example, which was both hilarious and incredibly relatable.
It's a fantastic illustration of the tension between Project 1 and Project 2 playing out inside a single person's head. The scenario is a man is at the gym with his wife, and some other guy starts hitting on her. He's rude, he's persistent, he's disrespectful.
Okay.
Now, Project 1, our evolutionary psychology, kicks in instantly. The husband feels a surge of jealousy, rage, and aggression. His inner ape wants to pick up a dumbbell and smash the rival with it.
That's the biological default setting. That's the natural response, hardwired over millions of years.
It is. But then we have the choice, which is Project 2, the normative project. If the husband acts on that impulse and kills the man, what happens? He ruins his own life. He goes to jail for decades. His wife leaves him. His children suffer. He descends into one of the deepest possible valleys of personal suffering.
So Project 2, the science of well-being, says, walk away. Your life will be objectively better if you control this impulse.
And the implication is that we don't need a perfect futuristic brain scanner to know that murder is a wrong answer in this situation. It's a demonstrably bad move on the moral landscape. But understanding the brain helps us see why the rage exists in the first place. That's the evolution part. And why learning to control it leads to a much higher peak of flourishing.
We don't have to pretend the rage isn't there. We don't have to suppress the fact that we are, at our core, animals. We just have to recognize that acting on every animal impulse is a systemic failure.
Exactly. The science of morality is about intelligently navigating away from the natural impulses that reliably lead to misery and toward the constructed, civilized behaviors that reliably lead to flourishing. It's about being smarter than our own instincts.
Let's bring this all back to the core themes of crisis and perception. Our channel is built on this idea of looking at systems versus placing individual blame.
This is so critical to Harris's argument as well. In the moral landscape, the concept of evil is not described as some mystical supernatural force. It's not a demon possessing someone. It is almost always a system failure, and very often, it's a failure of knowledge.
So the Dobu Islander, who is consumed with paranoia about his yams and his wife's sorcery, he isn't a bad person.
No. He's an unlucky person trapped in a bad system of belief. He's running bad software on his hardware. The core belief, sorcery is real, forces the behavior. I must mistrust everyone around me. The behavior isn't the root of the problem. The false belief about the nature of reality is the root.
So the crisis is one of perception. We perceive these as moral differences, like he values mistrust while we value trust, when really they are factual errors about how the universe actually works.
That's it. Perfectly. And this connects directly to the idea of the social manufacturing of belief. Beliefs about facts are what drive the moral system. If you genuinely believe that corporal punishment saves a child's soul from eternal damnation, which is a factual claim about the afterlife, then beating your kids can seem like a profoundly moral act.
But if you believe that corporal punishment harms a child's neurological development, a factual claim about biology, then the very same act becomes profoundly immoral?
The morality follows from the perceived facts. So why is this kind of structural explanation so fiercely resisted? Why do people hate this idea so much?
It seems to come back to that wall.
It comes right back to that fact value wall we started with. We are blinded by this deeply ingrained assumption that science deals with stuff, atoms, galaxies, cells, and that religion and culture deal with meaning, values, purpose, ethics. The entire book is an argument that this perception is false. They are both ultimately dealing with the same reality, the well-being of conscious minds.
So as we start to conclude this, the first step is to completely reframe moral disagreement.
Yes. The big shift in perception is this. Disagreements about how to live are not, at their core, matters of taste. It's not like arguing about vanilla versus chocolate ice cream where there's no right answer. It's more like arguing about how to treat cholera.
One person says, drink clean water and take antibiotics, and the other person says, perform a ritual dance and sacrifice a goat.
Right. Those are not two equally valid opinions. They are disagreements about facts. One is a correct hypothesis about how to achieve health, and the other is a failed hypothesis. Some cultures are simply wrong about how to flourish, just as some cultures, for centuries, were wrong about how to treat disease.
That is a very heavy realization. It seems to put a lot of weight on scientific authority. To some people, that might sound almost arrogant.
It does. And Harris addresses that critique head-on. But he counters that it is actually far more arrogant and far more narcissistic to look at a culture where women are being systematically oppressed or where people are living in abject misery and to say from our position of comfort, well, who knows? Who are we to judge? Maybe that's what's good for them.
It's the arrogance of indifference.
It is. Harris's hope is that morality will one day be seen as simply an undeveloped branch of science. He wants us to get to a place where we realize that truth in this domain has nothing to do with consensus or tradition. One person can be right about well-being, and an entire civilization of billions can be wrong.
Just like one person, Galileo, was right that the Earth moves around the sun, and the entire rest of the world, including all its highest authorities, was wrong.
Precisely. The majority has been tragically wrong about almost everything for most of human history. Why should morality be the one exception?
And that brings us to the final provocative thought that we want to leave you with.
This is the thing to mull over after you're done listening.
We've talked about this moral landscape with its peaks of flourishing and its valleys of suffering. We've talked about tearing down that artificial wall between is and ought.
So imagine a world where we actually accept that. Imagine we admit that some ways of living are demonstrably better than others because they lead to less suffering and more flourishing. If we accept that there are right and wrong answers to how human beings can thrive, how does that change our responsibility to intervene in the valleys of other cultures?
If a culture is systematically producing misery for its people, and we know it's because of a factual error, a bug in their software, do we have the right to just stand by and watch out of a misplaced sense of respect? Or does the map itself oblige us to try and help them find a path to higher ground?
That is the dangerous and perhaps necessary question that this entire system model forces us to confront. If morality is real and if suffering is bad, then a principled indifference may no longer be an option.
This deep dive was based on The Moral Landscape by Sam Harris. It is available in libraries and bookstores everywhere.
It's a challenging read for sure, but an essential one for understanding the systems that shape our values.
This project is free and publicly accessible. If you'd like to support the time, tools, and research behind Crisis in Perception, you can become a supporter on Patreon.
For a shorter visual overview of this topic, see the mini explainer linked in the description.
If you enjoy this kind of systems-level analysis, please like, subscribe, and comment with books or topics you'd like us to explore next.